So in the last lecture, we talked about the Mughals. Who were they? From where they come? And who were the important Mughal emperors? Right? Among the important Mughal emperors who ruled over Delhi and Agra at that time, and the moreover all the subcontinent of India. We discussed about Babur, who was the first, and after the Babur, the successor was Humayun, who was the son of Babur, and the third one was Akbar, the son of Humayun. Right? So Akbar's reign, we ruling means when he was doing military campaign against the different rulers of the country. The Amar Singh, who was ruler of Sisodia, Mewar, he accepted to be under to do uh, so successful campaigns against the six homes, and Ahmad shows much succeed in the against the six homes and Ahmednagar. The Prince Khurram, who was the son of Jahangir. Right? So Prince Khurram, also the future emperor, right? As Slim is known Shahjahan, sorry, Jahangir. Similarly, the Prince Khurram, who was a son of Jahangir, was known as Shah Jahan when he became the emperor. As the Salim rebelled against his father, similarly Shah Jahan also rebelled against his father Jahangir in the last year of his reign. The efforts of Noor Jahan, who was the Jahangir's wife, to marginalize him were unsuccessful. Right? So now the reign of Shah Jahan, who was the son of Jahangir, Mughal campaigns continued in the Deccan under Shah Jahan. What was the Deccan part? That's this part here, where the Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, that part is known as Deccan part of India. So Mughal campaign continued in the Deccan part also. The Afghan noble Khan Jahan Lodi rebelled and was defeated. So here the Afghan noble, a person named Jahan Lodi, rebelled against Shah Jahan and he was defeated. Campaigns were launched against Ahmednagar, the Bundels were defeated, Orcha seized, in the northwest, the campaign to seize Balkha from the Uzbeks was unsuccessful. Right. So, from the Deccan Plateau, he also defeated Bundels and Ahmednagar and captured the Orchas, but he failed to seize the Bahalkha from the Uzbeks. Kandahar was lost to the Safdis. In 1632, Ahmednagar was finally annexed and the Bijapur forces sued for peace. Right. So, firstly, he was not successful to capture the Ahmednagar, but finally he annexed this region and Bijapur also forced to be under the Shah Jahan. So, in 1657 to 1658, there was conflict over succession among us Shah Jahan's sons. Now you are looking that was the time when the son always rebelled against his father, right? Salim against Akbar, and Shah Jahan was again rebelled against Jahangir means Salim. Right now, Shah Jahan's sons also rebelled against Shah Jahan. So that process was going on because everybody, each and every person, only aim was those persons to capture the throne, right? So the relationships are not so much important for them. Aurangzeb was victorious and his three brothers, including Dara Sukh, were killed. Right? So there were four sons and three were killed, and Aurangzeb was succeed to capture the throne. So Shahjahan was imprisoned for the rest of his life in Agra. So what was the destiny? The son captured his father and imprisoned him for the lifetime. That was the rule of Mughals. Right. So Aurangzeb. Now come to the last ruler, Aurangzeb, and he ruled over Delhi 1658 to 1707. In the northeast, the Ahoms were also defeated because Shahjahan was not successful to defeat the Ahoms, but now Ahoms were also defeated in 1663, but rebelled again in the 1680. Now, in the 1663, he won the Ahoms, but in the 1680, Ahoms against rebelled Aurangzeb. So campaigns in the northwest against Yusufzai and the Sikhs were temporarily successful. So was a little bit success because again there was a rebel. Mughal intervention in the succession and internal politics of the Rathod Rajputs of Marwar led to their rebellion. When the Mughal tried to put their leg in the politics of Rajput became the rebellion. Right. So campaigns against the Maratha chieftain Shivaji were initially successful. When here the Marathas rebelled against Aurangzeb, so then they were succeed to capture the Shivaji, who was Maratha chieftains, but Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji. So this point you should remember because we will repeat it again in the next topics also. You have to remember that Aurangzeb, we are discussing about Aurangzeb only, that he insulted someone who defeated by a Mughal emperor. But before the Aurangzeb, no Mughal emperor was seen to insulted any one ruler. Only Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji, who escaped from Agra and declared himself an independent king and resumed his campaign against the Mughals. So when he was insulted by the Mughals, he fled out to Agra. But after that, he became an independent ruler, independent king, and made some campaigns against the Mughals. So Prince Akbar. Now this was not the first one, Salim's father. The name of Aurangzeb's son was also Akbar. Now this process will also going on. Now Akbar rebelled against Aurangzeb. Now his son Akbar rebelled against his father Aurangzeb and received support from the Marathas because Marathas were against the Aurangzeb. They insulted Shivaji, right? So Marathas supported the Akbar, right? And the Deccan Sultanate also supported the Akbar. He finally fled to Safavid, Iran. Now, after Akbar's rebellion, what happened? Aurangzeb sent armies against the Deccan Sultanate. Now, the Deccan Sultanates, Marathas, and the Prince Akbar was against the Aurangzeb. So, Aurangzeb sent his armies against his sultanates. Bijapur was annexed in 1685 and Golconda in 1687. From 1698, Aurangzeb personality managed campaigns in the Deccan against the Marathas, who started guerrilla warfare. Now again, he started the campaign against the Marathas, but Marathas took the step of guerrilla warfare. It was a type of war when there is a very much violence is there. So Aurangzeb also had to face the rebellion in North India by the Sikhs, Jats and Satnamis, and in the northeast of the Ahoms and in the Deccan of the Marathas. So all these were against the Aurangzeb. So his death was followed by a succession conflict amongst his sons. So after his death, there was a conflict among his sons also. Right now, you can see the Mughal Empire. It is a region of Mughal Empire, and after that, they also captured this Deccan region, also Ahmednagar, Bijapur, Golconda, always. Right. So almost the Mughal emperor were succeeded to capture almost all the part of India, including southern part also. Now, Mughal traditions of succession, right? So, Mughal traditions in these war campaigns, in the military campaigns, you say that they campaign against Marathas. Now, what happened? Shahjahan, means Jahangir, Shahjahan, and Aurangzeb, all these married to the Marathas girls, right? So, their wives were Marathas. The Mughals did not believe in the rule of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited his father's estate. Now here you can see after the death of any father, there was a conflict between the sons to about the throne always. So that is because Mughals did not believe in the rule of primogeniture. It means the after the death of father, the eldest son will be settled on the throne. Instead, they followed the Mughal and Timurid custom of co-pascenry inheritance. It means the property of the father will be divided, or the territory of the father will be divided among the all the sons, right? So follow the highlighted passages in table 1 and note the evidence for rebellion by Mughal princes. That's why the Mughal princes always rebelled against his father, against their brother, because they wanted to have some territory, but there was always one son captured all the throne, right? So here in the box, you can say Mughal marriages with the Rajputs. The mother of Jahangir was a Kachwaha princess, daughter of the Rajput ruler of Amber, where the mother of Shahjahan was a Rathore princess, daughter of the Rajput ruler of Marwar. As I told you, most of the Mughal emperor, when they were doing the military campaign against the Marathas, they married to the Maratha's princes. Now, Mughal relations with other rulers. Right now, we are talking about when the Mughal emperors make some campaigns against the rulers of India, which type of relations they have with these rulers. Right. So, you will notice that the Mughal ruler campaigned constantly against rulers who refuse to accept their authority. Firstly, they offer the rulers that if they are agreed to agree to their services, then no issue. They will not do any military campaign. But if they refuse, they have to fight with the Mughal emperor. So, but as the Mughals became powerful, many other rulers also joined them voluntarily. Right, one by after another, the Mughal emperor captured the territories. Different territories were annexed by the Mughal emperors. So, by seeing all these, the other rulers, some of the rulers agreed to follow them. Right, so they joined them willingly. The Rajputs are a good example of this, right? So why the princes of Rajputs were married to the Mughals? Because some Rajputs agreed or joined them voluntarily. So many of them married their daughters into Mughal families. Right, so to make the relations strong and to have some important positions in Mughal Empire, they married their daughters with Mughal emperors. So received high positions, but many resisted as well. But many of them were not in the favor of these kind of relationships. So the Sisodia Rajputs of Mewar refused to accept Mughal authority for a long time. He did not accept to be in the hand of Mughals. So once he defeated, however, they were honorably treated by the Mughals. No doubt, one after another, he was fighting with the Mughals, and once when he defeated, it doesn't mean the Mughals treated him badly or irrespectfully. It was he was treated very honorably by the Mughals, given their lands. So Mughals give their lands back to the Mewar Rajput, right? So this careful balance between defeating but not humiliating their opponents enabled the Mughals to extend their influence over many kings and chieftains. This was the quality of major Mughal emperors. When they defeated someone, they never humiliate them. Instead of it, they give their land back to him, but the defeated ruler will do the work under the Mughals, under their conditions. Right. So, but it was difficult to keep this balance all the time. As I told you in the table number 1, when the Shivaji was defeated, Aurangzeb insulted him. So it was the old one, he was the old one. Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji when he came to accept Mughal authority. And now, what was the consequences of this insult? Now, here we will talk about the two terms, Mansabdars and Jagirdars. Right? Who were these two? As the empire expanded to encompass different regions of the Mughals, they created diverse bodies of people. Now, at that time, the Mughals had captured a long territory of India. So they have to appoint some people to look after these territories. So they recruit diverse peoples to major positions. So from a small nucleus of Turkish nobles, they expand to include, firstly, only there were who were working for the Mughals, Turkish nobles, right? When the territory was expanded, they include some other bodies, some other peoples or also, right? Like Iranians, Indian Muslims, Afghan, Mughal emperors were expanding. The more and more were to appoint on the major positions. So firstly, Turkish nobles were appointed initially, but as the territory expanded, the more peoples like Iranians, Indian Muslims, Afghans, Rajputs, Marathas, and other groups who were annexed by the Mughals, they were also included in this recruitment. So those who joined Mughal services are enrolled as Mansabdars. Who were Mansabdars? The person who joined to give their services to the Mughals, they were known as Mansabdars. So you have to remember this word, right? Now the term Mansabdar refers to an individual who hold a Mansab. Now Mansab, why they were called Mansabdar? Because they hold Mansab. Mansab means a position, right? So they were recruited to the Mughal services and they gained some position or rank by the Mughal emperors. So that position or rank is known as Mansab, and the person who hold these position, who hold these Mansab is known as Mansabdars, right? So it was like a grading system. In your school also there is also a grading system, है ना? Above 80% you get a plus, no, A grade. Above 90% you will get A plus. Below 70 to 80 means between these two you will get B, right? So according to these you are ranked, right? So similarly that was also a ranking or a grading system, and Mughals fixed it on the basis of rank, on the basis of their salary and military responsibilities. So rank and salary were determined by a numerical value called Zat, right? So rank 1, 2, 3, right? So it is a numerical value. Similarly, their salary may be 4,000, whatever the currency of that time, and 5,000 like this, right? So these numerical values were called JAT. In the box, you can see the JAT ranking. Nobles with a JAT of 5,000 were ranked higher than those of 1,000, right? So who have the higher JAT, the rank will be higher of that persons, right? So in Akbar's reign, there were 29 Mansabdars with the rank of 5,000 JAT. By Aurangzeb's reign, the number of Mansabdars had increased to 79. What were these the consequences of this increment? We will see in this topic also. So the Mansabdar's military responsibilities required him to maintain a specified number of Sawar and cavalry men. So what were the responsibilities of these Mansabdars? They have to look after about the military persons concerned with the military, who were known as Sawar and घुड़सवार जिसको हम बोलते हैं. The Mansabdar brought his cavalrymen for review, got them registered, their houses branded, and then received money to pay them as salary. So what was the work of a Mansabdars? What were the responsibility of the Mansabdars? They have to took the military responsibility. They have to look after the sawar and cavalrymen. How many horses are there, right? So how many cavalrymen are there? And after then they have to register these cavalrymen. Their horses were also branded, given their names or all that. And for their military services, these cavalrymen were received salary. So all these were the task of Mansabdars. Now, from where they managed these salaries? Mansabdar received their salaries as revenue assignments called Jagirs. Right now, Jagirs are like iktas. We talked about the iktas, the land which were given to the persons. So similarly, here the land was given to the Mansabdars, and this land was known as Jagirs. Right. So the land given to the Mansabdar is known as Jagirs, which was earlier known as iktas. Right, but unlike muktis, most mansabdars did not actually reside in or administer their jagirs. What was the difference between the jagirs and the iktas? Iktas were given to the person who was living at that land, right? So to maintain that land, to collect the revenue from the land, and to spend these money over this land, or who are living on this land, that was the task of iktas. But unlike the iktas, jagirs, what was about the jagirs? The land was given to the mansabdars, but these mansabdars are not living on these lands. They were not administrating these lands. They only had right to collect the revenue. They can collect the revenue from these jagirs, but remember, they did not reside on these lands, and they do not administrate these jagirs, right? So when these revenues were collected, And moreover, they did not collect these revenues by themselves. This revenue was collected by their servants. Whose servants? Mansabdar's servants, right? So some servants collect these revenues from the Jagirs and gave to them, to the Mansabdars, right? So in Akbar's reign, these Jagirs were carefully accessed so that their revenues were roughly equal to the salary of the Mansabdars. So in the Akbar's reign, he carefully managed these Mansabdars. He appointed a limited number of Mansabdars, right, according to the Jagirs. What by these revenue, so that by the revenue of these Jagirs, the salary could be paid. But what happened in the Aurangzeb's reign? He made it 79. So there were number of Mansabdars, but the land was less according to them. So the reign was no longer the case. The actual revenue collected was often less than the granted sum. Suppose the Mansabdar was granted to 5,000 salary, but the collected money is, suppose that is 4,000. So there is insufficient money collected by these Jagirs because Jagirs were less and Mansabdars were uh, in a large numbers. So there was a huge increase in the number of Mansabdars, which meant a long wait before they received a Jagir. So they have to keep patience, they have to wait for their Jagirs when their return will come. Now, what will happen at that time? That will create the shortage of the shortage in the number of Jagirs. So what will happen if there is any shortage of any kind of thing like land, water, food, whatever? What will be the result? The cost of these Jagirs, the value of these things will be cost higher. Same happened there. Jagirs were less, the Mansabdars were in large quantity. Now what happened as a result? Many Jagirdars tried to extract as much as revenue as possible while they had a Jagir. When they have a Jagir, they try to collect more and more revenue, right? So because they did not know whenever their turn come again, right? So Aurangzeb was unable to control these development in the last years of his reign, and peasantry therefore suffered tremendously. Why? Because if the Jagirdars are extracting more and more revenue, after what, who will suffer? The peasants, because they have to pay the revenue. So ultimately, the peasants suffered in Aurangzeb's reign, right? So whenever there is a situation when there is a shortage of anything, the corruption will be followed. So it was also followed in Shah Jahan's reign, depicting corruption in his father's administration. First, a corrupt officer receiving a bribe, a tax collector punishing poor peasants. In the picture, you can see here a collector is giving bribe to the person, and here the person is beating the poor peasants, right? Now the word Japt and Jamidars, from where these Jamidari came, right? You read about the Jamidari ritual in our Indian society, Indian country, right? From where these comes, right? So the main source of income available to Mughal rulers was taxed on the produce of the peasantry. In most places peasant paid taxes through the ruler's allies, that is the headman or the local chieftains. What was happened? Almost, because at that time the industries were not there. Most of the peoples were engaged in the cultivation, in the agriculture. So the main source of the revenue was the peasantry. agriculture, right? So to whom they were paying the taxes? They were paying the taxes to the village headman or the local chieftains. And Mughals used the term jamidars for those persons who collect the revenue from the peasants, means the headman or the local chieftains or any other person who performed the task to collect the revenue from the peasants were known as zamindars, right? So now you are able to understand from where these words come from, right? So to describe all intermediaries, whether they were local headmen of villages or powerful chieftains, they, if they are collecting the revenue from the peasants, they were known as jamidars, right? So Akbar's revenue minister Todarmal, like your finance minister, at that time we called it finance minister. So Akbar's revenue minister who carried all these who look after all these tasks about the taxes, that name was Todarmal. He carried out a careful survey of crop yields, prices, areas cultivated for a 10-year period. Now what happened in the Akbar reign, it was very successful, successful administration. Whatever work he did a survey before them. No, so he made a survey about the crop means crop production, how much crop production is there, what is the price of that crops, because there are different crops are there. So different crops are there, different production are there. So an area from the past 10 years, type of crops are cultivated. All these surveys were taken place at that time. Total do these surveys in 1570